Welcome back to the Down the Stretch segment of our show. And I don't really need to introduce you because everyone in horse racing, or especially us New Yorkers who have followed racing for any amount of time, from when you were a jockey to now being on the broadcast, knows who you are. So welcome to the show, Mig.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me. Always fun to talk horses, especially with people that I enjoy exchanging ideas with.
I mean, we go back, we haven't known each other personally for, the time that I started in the business professionally back in the mid-'80s.
Mm-hmm.
But I've known you as a handicapper, and we have a mutual friend, the Source, Paul Kornman. And you go back years with him. I have to say that I'm a New Yorker like you are. Mm-hmm. My three favorite riders of all time in New York are Angel Cordero, four, Chris Antley,
yep,
Jorge Chavez, and you.
Okay, nice to be in that company.
And all of those you rode against.
Yes.
Right?
Yep.
Different stages of their career.
Rode with Angel when Angel was still in his prime. 1981 was my first full year, and I was an apprentice, and me and Angel, we went at it hard. Didn't like each other for the longest time. We're really good friends now, and a great deal of mutual respect, but not so much the first 4 or 5 years of my riding career.
What was it about him that bothered you, or why was the friction?
Well, I think we're both extremely competitive individuals, and the way I always looked at it, that there's a bag of money laying at the finish line, and I wanted to get to that bag of money as bad, if not worse, than anybody, and Angel was definitely the same way.
He wanted the bag more than anybody, and he rode that way, right?
Absolutely, and the thing about riding with Angel was you had to be on your game. If you weren't on your game and made a mistake, he was going to exploit it. You really had to bring your A game every day with him, but it was great for me because it really taught me how to compete. It really taught me how to prepare. It really taught me how to be on point all the time. That was as tough a colony of riders in general, early 80s on for the next 10, 15 years, that I ever competed with. And the purses were much smaller, and there was no quarter. You gave none and you asked for none.
Well, you were competitive as a kid, okay? I've read stories about you out in Long Island running horse. Tell the story about that. I was selling food at 10 years old at a boarding school to people who thought the food was stunk and making money off of them. But you were running your own rig at 10 years old as a kid, and there was some horse pony rides or something.
Yeah, so I moved out to Long Island and from Brooklyn, and I met some kids, David and Carlos Figueroa. They were cousins. Carlos's father had a pony ride business, and they would buy ponies from a guy in Riverhead. They would be shipped from out west. Now, when we say unbroken ponies, these were feral. These were horses round up off the plains, no human handling. We'd get them, buy them for anywhere $25 to $50.
Right.
And me, Carlos, and David were tasked with breaking and training them. And Carlos's father was really, really very good this way. He would never sell a pony to a kid unless it was absolutely bomb-proof, that the pony was going to be perfect. He wouldn't sell a pony that might, dump a kid or act the wrong way. So the ones we got that were bomb-proof and were good-looking, they would sell for $300, $400, $500. Ponies were buying for $25 to $50. Then you always had some that were bomb-proof, but they weren't as attractive, so they went in the pony ride business, and we would take them for birthday parties, block parties, whatever it was. And then there were always a group that were a little hot, and he wouldn't sell them as a kid's riding horse. Right. But back then, the 4-H had pony races, so we got very serious about pony racing, and where other kids would show up and they would break at the football poles, the field goal, goalposts, excuse me. And the other kids would show up with Western saddles riding along, and they would drop a flag, and they would, and try to kick them and get them going. We taught ours to break. So I would show up with a racing saddle, riding this short in stirrups. I had saved up. I bought a Caliente helmet, and I had goggles. Carlos's mother sewed me silk, so I actually rode.
How old were you?
11 years old.
11, right.
I had red and black silks. I always saw the Phipps colors, so I kind of patterned it after that, and she sewed it and made me that. And we would actually train our ponies. Ponies that were going to run on Saturday mornings, we would train until Thursday morning. And then Thursday after training, and then we'd go off to school, we'd close them up in a stall. They wouldn't see the light of day until Saturday morning again. We're racing 200 yards, so it's not like they weren't going to be fit. Give them a little extra grain. We would have them a little pumped up. And they'd come out of the stall on Saturday morning. Their eyes would be this wide. They'd be snorting. So when they dropped that flag, we were 3 in front every time. We were the Wesley Ward of pony racing, right? With the way he is with his 2-year-olds, the way they leave the gate. And we lost once out of about 30 starts. And it was because the pony, I was 3 in front, and I'm trying to look like a jockey. And that pony dropped his head and started bucking because we had him so high, he threw me off. So we would go back to the barn after the races, the pony races, and write charts. And all of them said the same thing: broke alertly, won under a strong hand ride. I'd have to run them up a hill at the end of the field because I was too small to pull them up. The hill would stop them. And then that chart read, broke alertly, was cruising along in front, lost rider. And that was the only time we lost.
Was there side betting going on? Like, did you play for some stakes?
Well, it was, if I remember correctly, it was $5 entry fees and the winner take all. So most of the pony races were 4 to 6 horse fields, so we'd take home $20-30. Back then was not an insignificant sum.
Right.
You were buying a bale of hay for $2.50 back then. But one Saturday, Carlos's father had come out to watch the pony races, and one of the other fathers got to complaining that we were winning everything. They bring a professional jockey. I was 11 years old. I wasn't but I had it going on. So they got to John, Carlos's dad, and this other gentleman, and they made a match race for the next Saturday. A horse, his son's horse, against this little pony named Sally, that I still believe is the fastest thing I ever sat on for 1/8 of a mile. I know it's not true, but in my mind's eye, she could fly. So it rained all the night before. They dropped the flag. She went to jump, and the ground broke away from her, and she skidded. I mean, she landed on her belly. When she got up, the horse was 3 lengths in front of her. This is a pony, and that's a horse. She went and caught this horse. I mean, just barely got him. So we go back to the barn, and unfortunately she had injured herself, so we were trying to do her up. We were kids. We didn't know a lot. We put a Furison sweat on her, and we wrapped her in saran wrap and put a bandage on to keep the tendon tight because she had a little bit of a tendon going on. And then we got her comfortable, and we turned on the races, racing from Belmont with Frank Wright, Charles C. Canty, Dave Johnson. And I watched Forgo catch Honest Pleasure in the Marlboro Cup, the last step.
Okay. You were 11 when you saw that?
Yes.
Okay. I was already in the game,
okay,
entrenched in the game. Let me tell you something about that race that will live on in my mind forever. That was the greatest performance by a horse that I ever saw in my life.
I'm with you.
And I'm going to tell you why. He was toting 136 pounds. Wasn't Shoemaker? Willie the Shoe was on that. Now, yes. Heliodoro Gustinez had ridden him.
Yeah.
That day, if you remember, the track was soup. Yep. It was disgusting. Yep. It was sealed mud upon mud upon mud. Forgo was out in the middle of the track.
Yes.
And he was bearing down. Yep. And would you believe that day, the inside part of the track was gold?
That was the place to be that day.
That was the place to be. Which makes the race even more impressive, that Phenomenal. He could run down in the, would you say, an 8 to 10 path.
Oh, he was way out. Yeah. And he was drifting too, and it's really interesting because I wound up becoming friends with Bill Shoemaker later on. I rode the very first Japan Cup and Shoe rode in it, and we really hit it off there. First time I ever had an adult beverage in my life was with Bill Shoemaker in Tokyo. And we talked about that race, because right after that race, in the tack room, in my mind's eye as a kid, I just did the same exact thing on a little pony.
Right,
I caught that horse, right?
Right. Against the bias.
Against the bias and off going.
Right.
And so I remember sitting in Tokyo looking at Mount Fuji with Bill Shoemaker at 16 years old. This is a mere 4 or 5 years later, right?
Right.
And asking about that race, because that race I announced to anybody who would listen, I was going to be a jockey. I was going to do what Bill Shoemaker just did. And he said that he always believed that if a horse had momentum, even if they were drifting, as long as you weren't fouling anybody, don't correct them, because you'll slow down their forward momentum. And he always felt like, even though Forgo was drifting that day, if he had corrected him even one stride, he would have got beat. So his philosophy on riding was the last eighth of a mile, don't get in the horse's way unless you absolutely have to correct them.
Was Shoemaker the first jockey that you actually watched closely, took a love to, or was there somebody before Willie?
Well, for me, growing up in New York, being a New York kid, and I would go to Aqueduct with my father. We'd get on the subway from Brooklyn, go out to Aqueduct. Braulio Baeza was the first rider that stood out to me because of the way his posture on a horse. In the post parade, he'd go by and his back would be arrow straight, and his focus was laser-like, and he, you could holler at other riders, and you might get an acknowledgement. And as a kid, a little wink and an acknowledgement was a big deal. Not with Baeza. He was like this, a statue. And I was always so impressed with his posture on a horse. So he was the first one that I really idolized and got my attention. And back then too, going to the races, they would close for winter racing. There was, the betting options was the Daily Double, which was the first 2 races, win, place, and show, and the 9th race triple. That was your wagering. There weren't exactas, quinellas, rolling, pick 3s, whatever it was. That was it. So you'd be on the subway, and all the talk would be about getting there for the double, one of the 2 exotics on the day. And I can't tell you as a kid how many times I'd hear people, oh, we got to bet Braulio. One guy, he was the same guy. We'd see him all the time on the train. Braulio, we got to bet on Braulio Baeza. And so it was already ingrained in me that he was one of the guys to look at.
And the Daily Double, I got introduced to the game by my father, who would take me in diapers to the track, always New York tracks. We've even come to Saratoga and do a Daily Double up to Green Mountain.
That's great. Oh, man.
And the double, if he went with $1,000, 800 would be in the doubles. He had to get a jump start on the day, right?
Wow.
Everything was the Daily Double, right?
That's great.
So at what point did you say, I'm going to be a jockey and I'm going to ride in New York?
Well, again, it was always something formulating in my mind. I worked with ponies at 9 years old before we even left Brooklyn at the Nellie Bly Amusement Park off the Belt Parkway. My Little League coach at Gil Hodges Little League owned the pony ride concession. And I didn't have any knowledge of that, but every year the Little League has a parade to kick off the season, the opening day parade.
Right.
So we're going down McDonald Avenue, and you're carrying your banner with your teammates. And our coach is on this horse behind us, clip-cupping away, and I was amazed that there was a horse trotting down the street in Brooklyn, first of all, but that it was my coach on him. So when we got to talking about it, he gave me a job working with the ponies. So I got very comfortable around ponies and horses, and I kind of knew this is the direction I'd like my life to take. I like being around the horses. So before my whole family actually moved out to Long Island, I went to live with my grandfather on Long Island. They needed the neighborhood wasn't great. There was a tendency to get in some trouble. My parents thought it was the prudent thing to do to kind of get me in a better situation. So I go out there, and my grandfather owned a restaurant with a partner. He was the chef. And I would hang out with him in the kitchen, and then I'd go explore on my bicycle, and I kept telling him about a farm I ran into out in Deer Park, Long Island. And I would just go there and sit, and the people wouldn't even talk to me, not even acknowledge me, and they'd go off for lunch, and I'd find a tree and look at the horses in the fields and eat lunch. And every night I'd say, Poppy, this is place. And one night it dawned on him. He said the person that ran the farm came into his restaurant to eat. So the next time he came in, he spoke to him. The guy's name was Hugh Cassidy. And he got me a job. And they paid me $1 for every stall I mucked out. And at the end of the week, I could take money or I could take riding lessons. So I never took any money. I took the riding lessons. And he thought I was going to be an Olympic champion. He had me jumping 5-foot fences by the time I was 12 years old. But now I've been involved with the pony racing. I'm watching racing on TV. I know I kind of want to be a rider. And a trainer named Lenny Hunt came out to the farm and saw me, and he said, you need to like start getting on racehorses. Next thing you know, I'm with a guy named Bill George out east, 13 years old, galloping racehorses. 14 years old, I wound up at Hemp Hill Farm in Old Brookville. By the time I'm 15, I'm at Belmont, working for Steve DeMauro, put under contract. I mean, that's how fast it happened. But I could tell you I remember distinctly the conversation. They closed for the winter. Every year, the first stake race back at Aqueduct was the Toboggan Handicap.
Right.
And we went out to see the Toboggan Handicap. Due Diligence won it. I'm not sure of the year, maybe 76. And I got on the train back with my dad, and I would study all the Wood Memorial win pictures on the 3rd floor while my dad was with his buddies. And I said to him, hey, Pop, I said, I'm going to be a jockey. And, what does a good father say? Of course you can. If you work hard enough, you want it bad enough. I'm sure he was thinking, I'll get too big, or, my mind will change along the way. And the conversation again, I said, and I'm going to win the Toboggan Handicap. I said, I'm telling you, I'll win the Toboggan. Well, I won 6 Toboggan Handicaps, more than anybody. And honestly, the Toboggan Handicap could have been the Kentucky Derby for me, because that was the first stake I ever saw. That was, I distinctly remember that experience with my father and the conversation on the train, telling him I was going to win the Toboggan. And every time I won it, it was a little emotional for me, because I could see 11-year-old me telling my father what I was going to do with the rest of my life. And then I actually, was fortunate and blessed enough to do it.
That was like the beginning of racing in New York every year, the Toboggan.
The Toboggan. That's what kicked off the year. Absolutely, yeah.
So what's amazing is you win the Apprentice Championship.
Yeah.
You win the championship for Apprentice Rider 1980?
81.
81.
81. And I was leading rider in New York that year. I won more races than Cordero was second, Georgie Velasquez was third. I won the meet title, the year-long title in New York that year.
And who was your main, who was the main clients that got you to, you have to win a lot of races, so you have to have some main go-to guys.
Well, Steve DeMauro, number one. I mean, I was under contract to him, and he was coming off of years having horses like Wajima and Dearly Precious, and he had won the Eclipse Award. So him taking me on gave me instant credibility. Automatically, other trainers said, well, if DeMauro is using this kid, he must be all right. And Steve didn't hesitate to put me on everything. I mean, I won so many stakes at the Bug. I think someone else is credited with the stakes record. I'm pretty sure I still have it. I won a lot of stakes with the Bug, Steve. I won the Long Island. I won the Knickerbocker. Won my first $100,000 stake up here, which is now the Albany. Back then it was called the DeWitt Clinton. I rode the very one for him. I went to as an apprentice, he took me to Japan to ride the very first Japan Cup. I mean, that speaks of confidence when a trainer's putting a 16-year-old kid in these situations.
And you were 16 years old when you were on these horses.
16, yeah.
And then name some other guys that were your main. I could tell you one of them, but that was a little later. But what name?
Well, in 81, I was riding a great deal for Bob DeBonis and Frank Martin. And the beauty of that, because back then they were the two leading trainers. And they were two big claiming outfits. They would claim horses off each other back and forth. It was like a revolving door.
Sigmund Sommer, right?
Sigmund Sommer. So the beauty of it is if you were riding for DeBonis, Pancho wouldn't ride you. Frank Martin wouldn't ride you. But then DeBonis would get mad over a ride, or somebody, was upset about something, and you'd get fired. So you'd walk over to Pancho's barn, Frank Martin kind of kicking a can, downtrodden, and he'd say, my boy, what's the matter? I said, Bob DeBonis fired me this morning. Send your agent by. Then you'd ride everything for him until someone got upset with a ride there. They'd fire you. You'd walk back to DeBonis. He'd rehire you. So it was like, back and forth. So I rode a lot of winners for them but I'll be honest, I give my agent back then, Joe Schiavone, who had been Ron Turcotte's agent his whole career, so much credit because I was pretty much alive in every barn. The first time I ever won 5 races in a day, it was for 5 different trainers, from Frank Tuffarello to Mickey Prager to Louis Barrera was a huge supporter
crazy
of
you're
mine.
mentioning these names that people now, like Bill Terrell, like I'm thinking of like these names you're mentioning, they're extinct now. Like people would not,
People don't
unless
know.
but like I made my teeth on this game on those guys that you're mentioning. I mean, those were new. I was just thinking, how you had the ultimate respect from the Rastafarians on the 3rd floor because
those are my people.
The Rastos loved you. I mean, you were their hero. Okay, they would buy you oxtail soup for life if you just came to. They would say, "We love the Mig" in their Jamaican accent.
And they always showed me that kind of affection. I hope it's because they and everybody else just knew how hard I tried. Listen, I'm never going to sit here and tell you I was the best rider. I was good. I made the most out of the talent or the abilities God gave me, and I worked very hard at it. But always tried hard. I mean, if I made a mistake, it was like an aggressive mistake. It was from the heart, and I think they always appreciated that. There's something I talk about a lot, and I talk about it on air because I think it's important for people to realize that a jockey's an athlete, different than other athletes because you're very dependent on your dance partner, which is the horse, right? I've never seen as great a rider as Lafitte Pincay, as strong as he was. He never put a horse on his back, right? So you need the horse to take you there, and then you've got to make the right moves. But nobody loved riding more than me. May have loved it as much. Nobody loved riding more than me, and nobody put as much into it as I did.
When I think of you as a rider, and I followed, every day, for all your career, nobody was better. I would say a rider I would mention today that would be similar to you when I think of comparing would be Saez.
Okay.
And the reason I say that is in a race where if Saez is on a speed horse or tactical speed, there's no better rider for him to put that horse in the game right away. Be aggressive out of the gate. Give him a clear lead. He's going to back the pace down. He's going to finesse you.
Sure.
Cordero would ride his horse and 3 other horses.
Sure, he was always,
But would that be a rightful kind of, if you had to compare yourself to a rider now, Tyler Gaffleone, I watch him. I love his ride. He
rides terrific.
I consider him an elite rider.
Yes.
I put you as a blend of, Saez and Gaffleone.
Well, listen, that's a high compliment. They're 2 tremendously talented riders. I was always comfortable on the lead because I always had a very good sense of pace. And that was something that was instilled in me early on from Steve DeMauro. I got to a point like where I wouldn't gallop horses anymore in the barn, but if they had 15 workers, I was going to work all 15 horses. And if Steve said go 5 furlongs in 101, I was going to go 5 furlongs in 101.
You had the clock in your head.
But it was developed over time. And I also was a very good gate rider because in between pony racing and thoroughbreds, I did work at the quarter horse track. Dennis Bryder was training quarter horses back then. He turned to training thoroughbreds later on. So I worked for him, and I got to ride a lot of match races out there after the meet ended. So I was good out of the gate, which gives you an advantage. You get your position going forward. And then if I could back it down and use it to my advantage. Now, the art of riding a front runner isn't just going to the lead and going as slow as possible. It's creating an advantage and then start to use that advantage when it's appropriate. So meaning if I've gotten the first half the right way, I've got a lot of horse under me. I'm not doing my horse a service holding up, waiting till closers are within proximity of me. I've created that advantage. Now I'm going to start stretching the field. I'm going to start allowing my horse to march on. Not go all in at once, but now I'm going to start giving them the slip. So if I've got a length on you, now I've got 2. Now it's going to make you start to do this. And now I got 3, and now you're coming after me.
So you're controlling the race.
Controlling the race.
From the front end.
The art of riding a front runner is taking your competition out of their comfort zone and start to drag them into the race earlier than they want, because what that does is stretch out their run, and their run's not going to be as potent.
And have them make premature moves.
Absolutely. Most horses don't have more than a quarter of a mile run. Really good horses, their runs, are a bit longer. Most horses, 3/16 to a quarter is their run. If I make you start your run at the 3.5 because I'm giving you the slip, by the eighth pole, you might be in trouble, right? That gas tank, that gauge is going to start going down. Now, you might get to me, but your horse's starts, mine might be starts, but I already had the edge.
Right. I'm going to give you a rider. You tell me what. I'm going to give you riders I really like, but I want you to tell me, when you observe them riding, what you like most about their style.
Sure.
And these are just in no particular order, but the greatest riders. We mentioned Cordero.
Sure.
He's an elite class, by himself.
But all that being said, we got to acknowledge all riders have strengths and weaknesses. Even your greatest riders, there's usually something they don't do as well as the other things they do.
Okay, I'm going to give you a rider.
Okay.
Tell me his strengths and then tell me his weakness.
Sure.
Ramon Dominguez.
His patience, strengths, patience, hands. Horses would run into his hands beautifully, keeping horses balanced, and timing. I always thought he could have finished stronger. Okay. I've told him that. I said, man, if you ever finished like Cordero, there's no comparison to your game, because he was just so good. His communication with horses was amazing.
He was one of my top, riders.
Sit in there, save ground, no panic.
Yeah. If I was a trainer, I would want a horse. One of the jockeys I'd really want is Dominguez, because I know I'd get a fresh horse back.
Absolutely.
At the end of the race.
It's a great thing you say, because one of his biggest supporters when he really started taking off in New York was Michael Hushin, who I had ridden for years.
That was the guy I was going to mention. I was holding him in my hip pocket.
Okay, well, we can talk more about him, but his philosophy on it, like when you rode for him, he would rather have you get trapped and not get out, because it wouldn't be a hard race on the horse, than making a 4 or 5 wide run, and the horse gets there and just gets beat because he hung or the wide trip, and now the horse is exhausted. He said, if you sit in there, and most of the time you're going to get daylight at some point, you're going to find room. 19 out of 20 times it works out. That 20th time, he would never be upset with you. He said, no, that's how I want you to ride my horses, because if you get beat that way, I have a fresh horse coming back.
Right.
So, and that's how Ramon rode.
Second rider. Loved him. Life took too short. Chris Antley.
Chris Antley was a tremendous talent. I was not the biggest fan.
Why?
Because he wasn't 100% when he caused an accident at Belmont that I took the worst of.
Oh, I didn't know that. I'm just...
No. I'm being candid. Yeah. And I don't like wasted talent. If he had ever was able to just focus and do his job consistently, his greatness would have really came through, would have shown through, because he was great.
He had all the tools. It was just, his...
It was very hard for him to stay clean with the pressure of having to produce every day. And I think that's a lot of times why he would fall off and slide back to bad habits. When he was not under that same kind of pressure, the same kind of expectation, he was better. Phenomenally gifted rider, horrible, for have his life taken so young, and it's a shame that so many people tried to get through to him. But being 100% candid, I had my issues, because there were also, at that period of time, was kind of an unspoken thing. You never, told on a guy, even if he was having problems. And in hindsight, that's ridiculous. If you're out there with 1,000-pound animals, it's a more dangerous environment. Plus, for their own well-being, forget racing, jockey, the success or failure of that, the success or failure of a human being.
Jorge Chavez.
Tried so hard. His desire, his will to win, very busy on horses. I think people have this misnomer between strength and being busy. People called him chop chop. He would never leave a mark on a horse. He was busy on a horse. And I think he got a lot of run out of horses that had short attention spans, because he would peck at them, and also the way he was built, he was able to find that sweet spot on a horse's withers, where it was almost like they were carrying less weight. Three riders, I should say, that to me always had an advantage because of their size and the way they were built, because they could find that spot where it was easier for horses to carry weight. Bill Shoemaker, Julie Crone, and George Chavez.
What about Pat Day?
Pat Day too, but he didn't sit a horse quite the same as them, where he was all up on their withers. Pat Day's strengths obviously was his patience. The guy never ruffled.
Right.
His ride on Wild Again in the Breeders' Cup,
Unbelievable.
no rider but Pat Day would have won on that horse that day. You think about the magnitude of that moment. $3 million race before $1 million races were almost commonplace now, right? The eyes of the world on you. This horse is drifting out, exhausted. And he never even thought about going to the crop. He kept the bit up in this horse's mouth. He kept them together. He kept them balanced. Any other rider in that situation that day, I'm certain would have gone to the crop, and you would have changed one thing. It would have changed that horse's rhythm. He was beat. Now, people said to me, I had ridden him two starts before I won my first Grade 1 on Wild Again in the Meadowlands Cup. And it was a pickup ride. I was never riding him back. Subsequently, I got hurt in between anyway, but people said, oh, it's too bad they didn't leave you on the horse. There's no way I would have won on that horse that day. Cordero wouldn't have won on that horse that day. I think 99.9% of riders wouldn't have won on the horse that day except for Pat Day. And I'll go so far as to say the horse is drifting out. In that situation, at the age I was then, I might have hit him left-handed. I mean, you might have lost your mind and done anything in a $3 million pot at that stage of your career. I mean, so Pat Day absolutely made all the difference that day.
Lafitte Pincay.
So strong. Just so strong.
I'd say, to me, the strongest finisher, or one of the strongest finishers I've ever seen.
I mean, I would put some guys in that league, but I think he's the benchmark. Most powerful hand ride, and just got more run out of horses with his just brute strength and his desire. He would ride a 10 claimer with the same enthusiasm as a Grade 1. And that's not commonplace. We got great riders that are not going to perform at the same level when you get below a certain level. Managing jockeys managing their careers was something that was unheard of into the 80s. I have the overnight from my first ride at Belmont Park, Triple Bug, Migliore. 12-horse field. It was a $25,000 maiden claimer. 9 Hall of Famers. Pincay was in the race. McCarron was in the race. George Velasquez, Angel Cordero, Eddie Maple, Cinto Vasquez.
Unbelievable.
Because they rode those kind. It became more fashionable later on, where guys started managing their career, something I never got the hang of. But, Jerry Bailey, great rider. His prime lasted longer than any rider I ever saw. His was the longest prime. He wouldn't ride cheaper races a month before the Breeders' Cup, a month before the Triple Crown, unless it was absolutely for a client, a Bill Mott or somebody like that. They would limit their exposure on cheaper horses. Then Mike Smith followed suit, and you could see the longevity they've been able to have. Johnny Velasquez was with Angel Cordero. Angel Cordero was a guy who rode. He didn't care if it was a 5,000 claimer or a $5 million race. He wanted to be in it. And he could never wrap his head around Johnny not having that same kind of desire to ride those kind of horses. And Johnny had been telling him for a long time, Angel, I don't care about being leading rider. I want to ride good horses. I'd rather ride 4 or 5 than 9 or 10. And he also recognized that it's hard to maintain that level of intensity riding 10 over a day. It's exhausting. He changed to Ron Anderson, and I'm sure it was a very tough decision because he's very close with Angel. But he never could get through to Angel. He needed to be managed more. And Ron Anderson had set the template with Jerry Bailey how to manage a jockey's career. And Johnny's much happier now. And I think it's led to him having an even longer career. I was of the cloth like those guys. Those are the guys I cut my teeth with. You ride. You know, I was the guy who would have coffee in the track kitchen with a guy, and he'd have 3 horses, and he might say, Mig, you know, I got this filly. I know she's cheap, but she got a bad ride last time. Would you consider riding her? I couldn't say no. Those were my people. Those were the people I grew up with. Those were the people I, you know, lived on the track with. It bit me a couple times. I mean, I got hurt on a $20,000 maiden claimer right before Artie Schiller. You know, horse flipped over on top of me for, you know, a horse I probably shouldn't have been on. But, you know, I have these conversations with my wife. She said, but that's what made you you. That's what people
and beloved and beloved in New York.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm blessed that way. I mean, you know, I really, but again, I grew up here. You know, I was a kid on the backstretch. I loved being there. I loved the interaction. I lived on the backstretch and couldn't have been happier.
So I'm going to mention just one trainer.
Sure.
Okay.
You can mention any. I'll tell you.
No, but we touched on Mike Hushin. I loved Mike Hushin.
Great trainer.
I moved to Vegas with my family 20-something years ago on the advice of Ernie Dahlman.
Okay. And
Ernie, as you know, and his partner, Eugene Howman.
Yes.
They were Mike Hushin's main guys.
It's when Mike really got started.
Right. I mean, then came Barry.
Yes.
Barry Schwartz later.
Yep.
But I remember, so we stayed in the Barbary Coast. Okay. And, you know, I had a room in the back. You know, I went there because Ernie said, you know, I can get you a good rebate. And Ernie was one of the sharpest bettors in New York.
Yes, he was. Absolutely.
And an unbelievable owner. I mean, he moved, you knew that he moved from the harness game
yes.
to the flat game, but he killed it. He bet so much money that they housed his cash in a vault in the Mutual, behind the Mutual counter. Yeah. And he had all his relatives tie up the lines at Roosevelt and Yonkers Raceway.
Oh my gosh.
And he would go from one line to the next line to the next line to bet. Well, he didn't know how to use a computer. So he said, Wizard, set me up with a computer. I want a computer. Right. I said, well, I'll give you mine. And mine was probably worth $200, $300. It was old. Right. And he said, set it up. I want it today. I'll give you $2,000. I set it up so we could see the tote board.
Gotcha.
We made, so in harness, he cleaned up because he did the modified sulky, the lightweight sulkies. Then he went into when the harness game couldn't support his action.
Right.
He went to thoroughbreds. Was out in Hauppauge, OTB, which I would visit him. He'd always have a wizard sheet in the program sent to him every day.
Wow.
So the Hushin horses that he would claim, and he would add the 4-wheel drive.
Yes.
And I would see it with my own eyes. He made astute claims, but he would bet the shit out of these horses.
Yep.
And you delivered. Mike delivered. You delivered. It was like taking candy from a candy store sometimes.
You know, it was great at that period of time, riding for Mike, riding for Ernie. We were all on the same page. We knew how we were going to approach things. The conversations were about how we were going to execute things. And to be on a team like that, and everybody hitting on all cylinders, claiming the kind of horses that Ernie was, pointing out and claiming.
All speed.
Love speed.
Love speed. There was no wasting of time.
And even Mike would go one step further, too. Like, you come to the pack and say, Mike, there's a ton of speed in here. And he goes, you go. They'll know next time we're not taking back. Like, he was already thinking for the next start. Well, they know these guys don't care if they get in a speed zone.
Right.
And it would make other guys back off because they knew we weren't going to back up. We were going to go forward. If we got beat that way, we got beat that way. The other thing, too, Mike, just tremendous horseman. We get horses in such good shape. And then spotting them. He would get a horse like a Reappeal, right? Sway back horse. And we wound up running him for 10. They claimed him for more. We ran him for 10. But he was a legitimate $25,000 horse at that point. And the idea, if they won him for 10, we won the race, they took the horse. Nobody claimed him. ran him back for 14. Now, psychologically, people are going, well, I could have had him for 10 a few weeks ago. Do I want him for 14? We won again. They didn't take him. Now he ran for 20. By the time he got to 25, which he was a legitimate $25,000, he had won 5 in a row.
Right.
Right? And again, people were reluctant to, well, do we claim him now? I think I won 7 in a row on that horse, you know. But that was part and parcel of the philosophy. If you could start a horse out a little undervalued, that gave you places to go if you didn't lose him.
It was so great because I'd be in Vegas and he'd have a shoe guy.
Yes.
At the track, and he would claim horses that weren't, you know, wearing the shoes. Right? He'd put the shoes on. Speed horse knew exactly what to do, as sharp as they come. Alan Jerkins, my favorite trainer of all time, my personal favorite.
Yeah.
I would say if I talked to 5 of you, right, that were around the game and around Alan Jerkins.
Yeah.
I would think you would say the same.
He absolutely the greatest horseman that I've ever been around with racehorses. There was a man I worked for as a kid, Mr. Niles. The first farm I went to work at, they had show horses on one side, coaching horses on the other. And I started out with the coaching horses and Mr. Niles, and he could tell you more about a horse's soundness backing them into a harness, watching them take 4 steps backwards than most people could watching a horse jog on the road. But then at the racetrack and with racehorses, Alan, completely different league. And I would hustle, if I was done early riding, I would hustle to his barn to push the feed cart in the afternoon, because he always fed his horses. Nobody fed Alan Jerkins' horses but Alan Jerkins. And you've got very successful Hall of Fame trainers. They never feed their own horses. Their assistant does, or the foreman, whoever. But Alan would feed them every night, go off, have dinner himself, and can come back and see how they ate, who left what. And every horse was different. It wasn't like, oh, they get 2 scoops of this, a scoop of that. Every horse, their meal was catered to what he knew their preferences were, what they needed, their nutritional deficiencies, or whatever they might need to get stronger. And the wisdom, the things he would talk about, things that were unconventional to me at the time. I rode a horse for him one day that had been sprinting on the turf. And he ran her 1.1 miles. And she was always in front, 21:44. So what am I going to do going 1.1 miles? I'm like, she's going to run away with me. I'm going to look like an idiot. Gives me no instructions. I warmed her up light. I broke out of the gate quiet. I didn't touch her mouth. I didn't ask her. She went to the lead. Came back to me and floated on the lead. 1/2 and 50. For a horse that goes 44. I asked her to turn it for him. I opened up 3. She couldn't stay. The 1.1 miles, got caught. I'm relieved. I did my job, right? Come back, talk to Alan. He's upset. I'm like, Chief, I said I slowed the pace down. What? She just can't go that far. You slow the pace down. He goes, horses have been running away from their enemies for millions of years. I get a jockey wants to change evolution. She's got one weapon, her speed, you take it away from her. So that's when it opened my mind.
I knew him, I remember doing a show at Capitol OTB. It's like the summer, there's a rainstorm, the temperature drops 30 degrees. It's now 55 degrees and it was 80 like an hour ago. And I'm freezing on the set and he's on his golf cart and he comes over, he goes, "Wizard, you look cold." I go, "Yeah, I am cold." He goes, "I'll be right back." He goes back to his barn, comes back 5 minutes later with this orange this winter coat, right? He says, "Put it on." I put it on. Now, he's an extra large. So I'm sitting and he's staring at me. And he goes, "Now you'll be warm." Right?
That's the truth.
And that's what he would do. Yeah. He put on a Sunday deli meat, like platters of food for the backstretch on his own dime. Like the guy was freaking amazing.
Amazing on every level.
I remember he would put Noel Winter on a horse. And he'd stand by the rail to watch the race. And he's watching the horse run, and like this one ride, Noel Winter screws it up bad. Sure. And I see like his veins, he started to get like blood red and veins popping out of his head. And I'm saying, "Oh my God, Noel, wait till you get off." And Noel gets off the horse and he's trying to run the other way.
He wants to get away.
He doesn't want to go and get to the chief, right? So he's not walking towards the chief, he's walking away. The chief follows him. right? And I'm following the chief. I want to see what he's going to say. He gets to know Winter, and he goes, "What the fuck did you do? I had this horse ready to run. All you had to do was sit on a fucking horse, right? I'm gonna break your neck." You could see, and I would say to Chief, and Noah Winter ran away like a pussy cat, and I'd say, why do you do that to the poor kid? He goes, "I have these horses ready to win." I go, I can have anyone ride those horses. They're not supposed to screw it up when they're supposed to win. Did he ever do that? Did he ever ream you out?
He got after me one day. No, but if you don't, I got to tell you a couple stories and then tell you when he got into me, because it speaks to our history, our relationship. We got down to Hialeah. I actually was 14 when we first got to Hialeah for the winter, Steve's barn. And every day, Alan, Jimmy, all the grooms would be heading after feed time to the quarter pole shoot at Hialeah to play touch football. And I was too shy to ask. I wanted to play football with them. I'd see them go by. And for a week, I'd stand there and I just didn't know what to say. And then one day, Jimmy threw the ball to me. I caught it and he goes, "Hey, you want to play football?" And that became a lifelong friendship. Me and Jimmy are dear friends. I actually spoke to him just yesterday. He won his first race in Saudi Arabia.
Jimmy Jerkins?
Jimmy did.
Now, the second best trainer, underrated, like a great trainer.
Incredible horseman, cut from the same cloth as his dad. So we got close then. Then I got hurt really bad in '99, and actually, Lloyd's of London wanted to buy out my personal disability. Their doctors ruled it a career-ending injury. I went down at the top of the stretch and got run over, and one horse kicked me in the back of the head, and another stepped on my forearm and completely shattered my forearm. And they said it was like getting shot with a high-powered rifle at close range. It complete went through the radius and the ulna. So I had to have 3 different surgeries, 3 different bone grafts to kind of fix my arm in stages, and I made it back to riding. My wife actually asked me to retire. She said, with the money we had, the buyout from the insurance, you don't need to do this anymore. And I was like, I still think I can. I want to. So I go to Florida. I start riding. Was riding maybe 5 days. Rode 8 races, 1, 2. You're easing back into it. And I asked Alan to ride a horse named Full Bore that had just run second at Calder. Horse looked like he needed a strong ride, and an apprentice had ridden the horse. So I have 3 mounts to stay. It's a Monday. The first race, I'm on a filly. I go down at the top of the stretch. My 6th day riding. I'm in front in 12-horse field, and I go down. And I'm going end over end, and I'm waiting to get hit. That's the pain. You don't even mind hitting the ground. It's getting the run over. Nobody touched me. Horse went over the top of me, and I'm fine. Got the air knocked out of me. But I'm shook up. You feel like you're supposed to have a grace period. I was out 7 months, 3 surgeries. I'm not supposed to fall this fast. So I'm a little shook up. So I go to first aid. I check out fine. I go back to the jockey's room. I'm supposed to ride Alan Jerkins' horse in the 3rd race. So they say, "You going to ride?" I said, I don't know. I need a minute. I went in a closet where they store the trunks, and I'm sitting in the dark. And it's like an angel on one shoulder going, "Go home, hug your wife and kids, forget this, And then there's the devil going, "What's the matter with you? Cowboy up. You got no heart, And I'm having this conflict, this turmoil. And it got down to my mind, I said, there's no reason why I can't ride physically. So if I let this mental game beat me, I might as well just quit right now. I'm done. So I walk out of the room. I'm riding. I go out to ride this horse for Alan Jerkins. I've never sat on the horse. Just saw that race at Calder. Alan doesn't say anything, and Alan sees everything. He doesn't miss a trick.
Right.
Good luck, get me a check. Throws me up on the horse. Well, this horse's shoulders were about this wide. He was the most muscle-bound horse I've ever sat on in my life. I start warming him up. You got to be kidding me. This horse feels terrible. And I just crashed with the last one, and I'm warming him up back and forth at Gulfstream. And I don't want to scratch him, but I feel like I should scratch him. So, well, it's Alan Jerkins. I trust him. So I'm literally starting to get like, okay, boys. The horse wins by a neck. Stumbled after the wire, almost fell down. He just sound, but a horrible mover. I come back to the winner's circle, and Alan's a great big man. He's crying, hysterical. And that's past me. Like, I got past this. I just won. I'm not, And he goes, I said, Alan, what's the matter? Chief, we won. He goes, I saw you fall in the first race. I thought you were dead. He goes, then I put you on this bad going son of a bitch. He goes, if I was you, I'd have gone home. You're the bravest guy I ever known in my life. So, and he's hugging me, crying. And then I won the feature race that day on a very good horse on the dirt named With Anticipation.
And on the dirt.
And I told my agent that night, I was walking out of the race with my agent, and I said, that horse we won the feature on, he'll win grade ones. But I'm thinking on the dirt. Then he switched him to turf. He wound up being a grade one winner on turf, but he was, I think, every bit as good on the dirt.
That was your horse you rode quite a bit, right?
No, I actually, so then he went to Keeneland, and Pat Day wound up picking up the mount.
Okay.
I never rode him again. I beat him with Lunar Sovereign in the Man of War like a year or two later. But no, because I didn't used to go to Keeneland. I wound up going to Keeneland for one meeting because it was like a bucket list thing, and I was coming off an injury, and I said, you never know when this ends. I want to be able to do that. And I actually stayed at Three Chimneys Farm. Robert Clay owned Three Chimneys then. I had ridden Hidden Lake for him, who was champion older mare. Gave me a cottage on the farm. So that was a wonderful experience to wake up in the morning and there's weanlings and go say hi to Seattle Slew in the Stallion Barn because he was my all-time favorite. Him and Forgo were my two favorites. And then, be a mile from Keeneland to go to work. I mean, that was a wonderful meet.
Did you ever ride a horse for the source? Did you ride Win?
I rode Win for Paul.
Right.
I rode Exclusive Partner for Paul. I rode several, Trubilare. But Win, it was an interesting circumstance because Win was a very difficult horse when he was a young horse.
Yeah, right.
Sally Bailey was training him. And he had a reputation of being a rogue. I mean, he would tear up the starting gate, he'd tear up the paddock. So Antonio Grael was riding the horse when nobody wanted to ride the horse.
Right. Visit wizardracingsports.com and purchase now. Since 1986, the Wizard has been your source for the best handicapping products for the always challenging Saratoga meet. Wizard selections include analysis and wagering strategies for every race. Wagers are updated after late scratches. The Wizard wagers every day, backing up his opinions with his own money. Visit wizardracingsports.com and purchase now.